I remember my left heel. It was a beige stiletto, lying right there on the asphalt, surrounded by thousands of tiny, glittering diamonds of shattered windshield glass. The weird part wasn't the shoe being off. It was that I was looking at it from an angle that should have been impossible. I should have been screaming. I should have been feeling the heat of the engine or the weight of the steering column crushing my chest. But I didn't feel a thing. I just stared at that shoe, and I realized I wasn't in the car anymore. It was a Tuesday, I think. The sky was that heavy, bruised purple color you only see in late October. I was driving back from a listing in the suburbs, a colonial house with a white fence that I'd spent 3 hours trying to convince a young couple was worth the commute. My phone was buzzing in the cup holder. A client. Always a client. I remember reaching for it. Just a quick glance. And then something felt off. The radio didn't cut out, but the music, some jazz station I usually kept on for background noise, it started to sound like it was underwater. Warped. Slow. I looked at the clock on the dashboard. The digital numbers were 5:42, and they just stopped. The colon between the hour and the minute didn't blink. It just stayed solid. I remember thinking, that's a weird glitch. I was driving under the I-95 underpass. The big concrete pillars were flashing by. Shadow light, and then the shadows didn't go away. A semi-truck had hydroplaned. It was jackknifed across all 3 lanes, and I remember the smell of burnt rubber hitting me a split second before the impact. There was no time to pray, no time to think about my mother or my life and regrets. I just remember the steering wheel felt suddenly very, very cold, like ice. And then, the world didn't go black. It went silent. A silence so thick you could almost taste it, like the air had been sucked out of the world. I saw my hands. For a brief second, they were still on the wheel, but I wasn't the one holding it anymore. The sound, that's what I can't forget. Or rather, the way the sound just died. Have you ever been in a room when the power goes out? That sudden thump of silence when the hum of the fridge and the AC just vanishes? It was like that, but 1,000 times heavier. I saw the front of my car crumple. I saw the hood fold up like a piece of tin foil. It was slow, almost graceful. I didn't feel the impact. I didn't feel my ribs snap or my head hit the side window. It was like I was a ghost in my own skin, just sliding out of the way of the pain. Then came the darkness. But it wasn't just dark, it was a physical weight. I felt like I was being submerged in thick, black oil. I couldn't feel my arms. I couldn't feel my legs. I tried to gasp. You know, that instinct to catch your breath when you re-scared, but there were no lungs to fill. There was no me left, just a tiny spark of awareness floating in a void that felt miles deep. I remember thinking, oh, so this is it, It wasn't peaceful. Not for me. It was terrifying because I realized I was completely, utterly alone in a place where light had never existed. The fear wasn't about dying. It was about being forgotten in that nothingness. I waited for the tunnel, I waited for the relatives or the bright light people talk about on TV. Nothing came, just the cold, and the realization that my life, the houses I sold, the commissions I worried about, the emails I hadn't answered, they were all gone, and I was still here, wherever here was. I wasn't in the oil anymore. Suddenly, I was hovering, about 15 feet above the highway, right under the belly of that concrete overpass. I could see the top of the semi-truck. It looked like a giant, broken toy. And then I saw my car. It was tucked under the trailer, crushed so badly it didn't even look like a vehicle anymore. It looked like a pile of scrap metal. I saw the first responders. The blue and red lights were pulsing, splashing against the gray concrete pillars. But the colors, they were too bright. The blue was so sharp it hurt to look at, and the red, it looked like wet paint dripping off the air. I saw a man in a yellow reflective vest. He was shouting something. His mouth was moving fast, but I couldn't hear the words. All I could hear was a low, rhythmic thrumming, like a giant heart beating underneath the earth. Then I saw myself. I was slumped over the deployed airbag. My hair, I'd spent 40 minutes curling it that morning. It was matted with something dark. I looked so small. I didn't Ndapos, T feel sorry for her. I didn't Ndapos, T feel a connection to that body at all. It was just a suit I'd been wearing. I remember looking down at my hands in this state, but there were no hands. I was just a point of view, a camera with no lens. I noticed a small detail, something so stupid it stays with me. There was a coffee cup, my travel mug, sitting perfectly upright on the pavement about 10 feet from the wreck. Steam was still rising from it. The world was chaos. People were screaming, sirens were wailing. But that cup of coffee was just sitting there, peaceful. And then, I felt a tug, not on my body, but on my soul. Like a hook had been snagged in the center of my chest, and something started pulling me away from the lights, away from the highway, into the shadow of the bridge, where the light didn't Ndapos, T reach. The highway sounds, the sirens, they faded until they were just a hum, and then nothing. I was back in the dark, but it wasn't Ndapos, T the same void as before. This place had dimensions. I was moving, or being moved, through a space that felt like a vast, empty cathedral made of shadows. It was freezing, not the kind of cold that makes you shiver, but the kind that feels like it's hollowing you out from the inside. And then, I realized I wasn't Ndapos, T alone. I couldn't Ndapos, T see him with eyes, but I felt a presence. It was standing just outside my field of awareness. To my right, always just a bit behind me, I felt a wave of absolute, paralyzing fear. This wasn't Ndapos, T a guardian angel. This wasn't Ndapos, T a lost relative coming to take me home. It felt ancient and heavy, like a mountain was standing next to me, waiting for me to acknowledge it. I tried to turn. I tried to look at whatever it was. But the more I tried, the further away it seemed to shift, staying perfectly in my blind spot. It didn't Ndapos, T speak, not in words, but I felt a question vibrating through the darkness. It wasn't Ndapos, T what have you done with your life, or anything noble like that. It was more like, why are you still holding on, I saw my life then, but not as a movie. I saw it as a series of cages. The mortgage, the reserved personality I wore like armor. The way I never let anyone truly see me because I was too afraid of being judged. The presence just stood there, watching me realize how heavy my own armor had become. It was waiting for me to let go, to just dissolve into that black cathedral. I felt myself starting to slip. The fear began to turn into a strange kind of exhaustion. I was so tired of being Amanda Brooks. I was ready to just stop. But then, I remembered that coffee cup on the asphalt, the steam rising into the cold air. A tiny, meaningless thing. And for some reason, that one image, it made me angry. I wasn't Ndapos, T done with the steam yet. The moment I felt that spark of defiance, the presence, it didn't Ndapos, T leave. It leaned in. I felt a coldness so intense it felt like a burn against the back of my neck. And then a voice, not in my ears, but inside my very essence. Not yet, but soon, The return wasn't Ndapos, T a choice. It was a violent, physical rejection. 1 second I was in that vast, silent cathedral of shadows with that thing behind me, and the next, wham! It felt like being shoved into a suit of armor that was 5 sizes too small and made of jagged glass. Everything hurt. The air in my lungs felt like acid. The smell of the airbag chemicals, that acrid, metallic powder, burned my throat. I heard a sound, a rhythmic, mechanical clack, clack, clack. It was the wipers. The car was totaled, the engine was dead, but the wipers were still scraping across the dry, shattered windshield. Scrape, scrape, scrape. I tried to move my hand, but it felt like it belonged to someone else. I looked out the window, past the twisted metal of the A-pillar, and I saw it. The coffee cup. It was gone, crushed under the boot of a paramedic, probably. That was 10 years ago. People ask me if I saw the light. They want me to tell them it was beautiful, that there's nothing to fear. I lie to them. I tell them I dawn and Ndapos, T remember much. Because how do you tell your friends at a dinner party that death isn and Ndapos? T a hallway to a garden, but a dark room where something is waiting. I'm still reserved, maybe more than before. But I dawn and Ndapos, to drive under that bridge anymore. And sometimes, at night, when the house is too quiet, I feel that same coldness on the back of my neck. Just for a second. The same weight. The same silence. It's like I'm still standing in that dark cathedral, and the last 10 years have just been a very long, very vivid dream. I know it, and Opos is still there, waiting for me to finish the steam.